Imagine you are sitting in a really high-stakes
Oh,
meeting.
yeah. Or like the absolute final round of a major job interview.
Right, exactly. And you've just spent the last 10 minutes flawlessly breaking down this highly complex problem.
Just completely crushing it.
Yeah. Let's say you're dissecting, emerging tech or shifting market trends. You're articulate, you're confident, you are just completely in your element. And then the interviewer leans back, gives you a little smile, and asks this seemingly simple question. They say, so how would you describe your personality? Like, what actually motivates you?
And suddenly, all that eloquence just completely
It's
evaporates.
just gone. You completely freeze. You go from delivering this absolute masterclass in market analysis to, well, stumbling over basic adjectives.
You sound like you've never actually met yourself before.
Exactly. It's so awkward. And the question is, why does this happen? So today, we're looking at the research of an organizational psychologist named Sophia.
She's the one who figured out exactly why our brains basically betray us in these moments.
Right, and more importantly, how to actually fix it. So, okay, let's unpack this, because this deep dive is really for you.
Yeah. Whether you are actively preparing for a big career move, or maybe you're stepping up to lead a new team.
Or even if you're just, simply trying to map out your own communication style, the mechanics hidden in Sophia's story here are universally applicable.
They really are. And Sophia's perspective is particularly revealing, I think, because she works as a leadership coach for these massive international companies.
Right.
So she spends every single day analyzing how high-level professionals handle things like teamwork, emotional intelligence, and, just general communication.
She gets a front row seat to all of it.
Exactly. And she started noticing this really pervasive pattern among advanced English speakers. They could handle incredibly dense topics. I'm talking corporate strategy, macroeconomic shifts, tech innovations, just with total ease.
Smooth sailing.
Right.
Yep, yeah.
But the moment the conversation required them to answer personal questions like, how do you handle conflict? Or how has your personality changed over time? Boom. Yeah, they just hit an absolute brick wall.
It's crazy. I look at this fluency paradox. It's kind of like a massive imbalance in a computer system.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, having an incredibly advanced professional vocabulary, but zero self-awareness, it's like having a top-of-the-line 8K graphics card, but you're running it on a completely corrupted, outdated operating system.
Oh, man. Yeah. That is a perfect analogy.
Like, the external display looks phenomenal when it's running the standard pre-programmed corporate software.
Right, the stuff you do every day.
Exactly. But the very moment you ask the system to run a diagnostic on itself to look inward, the whole machine just crashes because that foundational architecture just isn't there to process the command.
What's fascinating here is how our professional culture actively encourages that exact imbalance.
Oh, completely.
We are heavily incentivized to upgrade the graphics card, to use your analogy, while just completely ignoring the operating system.
We spend, decades mastering the external language of our industries?
Yeah, because that is what gets measured and rewarded.
Exactly.
And the source material actually shares this incredibly tense, almost cinematic moment where Sophia is attending a global leadership conference.
Oh, this part was wild.
Right. So the keynote speaker is up on stage, looks out at this massive audience of highly successful executives and asks them one single question. He says, "Do you know who you are when no one is watching?"
And the room just falls completely silent.
Complete silence. I mean, these are executives who have spent years, decades even, developing strategic thinking and hard skills.
But they haven't spent any meaningful time analyzing their own natural or experience-shaped personalities.
Exactly. They have literally never audited their own underlying software.
And that silence deeply unsettles Sophia. I mean, you can feel it in the text. It forces her to start reflecting on her own life, asking herself, how much of her personality is hardwired, how much has been shaped by her environment.
And can her identity actually continue to evolve in adulthood?
Right. And to understand that, she realizes she can't just learn new vocabulary words. Like, flashcards aren't going to cut it here. She needs to understand the psychological machinery of the human mind.
So she goes straight to the behavioral science. She dives into two monumental frameworks, which I love. The first is emotional intelligence by Daniel Goleman.
A classic.
Yeah, and she pairs that with the behavioral economics and cognitive psychology of thinking fast and slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Which is such a heavy-hitting combo.
It really is.
Yeah.
And when you synthesize the mechanics of these two works in the context of professional communication, you start to see exactly why that boardroom of executives fell silent.
Okay, let's break down those mechanics. Because, understanding that emotional intelligence is important is one thing, right? We all know we should have it. But understanding how our brains are actually processing these interactions in real time, that's the real key.
Right. So from Goleman's research, Sophia targets the biological reality of how we process stress. Goleman writes extensively about the amygdala, which, for those who don't know, is the brain's primitive threat detection center.
Like the lizard brain.
Exactly, the lizard brain. Now, in a corporate environment, when someone challenges your idea in a meeting, your brain doesn't necessarily distinguish between a threat to your ego and, like, a physical threat to your life.
Wait, really? It treats a snarky comment the same as a tiger jumping out at you?
Basically, yeah. The amygdala can essentially hijack your neural circuitry. It floods your system with stress hormones before your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, analytical part of your brain, can even boot up.
Wow.
So Goleman's whole premise is that true success requires recognizing that biological surge, so you can respond thoughtfully rather than just reacting impulsively to a perceived threat.
Okay, that makes sense. And then Kahneman's work adds an entirely different layer to how we process that information. Right.
Yeah, Kahneman divides the mind into two distinct operating systems.
Okay, lay it on me.
So system one is fast, intuitive, and highly emotional. It operates completely automatically. Little or no effort. No sense of voluntary control.
It's just happening.
Exactly. Then you have system two. That one is slower, more deliberative, and way more logical.
The thinker.
Right. Now, system one relies on heuristics, which are basically mental shortcuts, to make lightning-fast judgments about the world just to save cognitive energy.
Because if we had to logically process every single thing, our brains would explode.
Exactly. But here's the catch. Those unconscious, instantaneous emotional judgments heavily dictate how we communicate, how we assess our colleagues, and how we make decisions in the workplace.
Even when we think we're being super rational.
Oh, especially then. We think we're being completely rational, but most of the time, our slow system 2 is just rationalizing the snap emotional judgment that our fast system 1 already made milliseconds earlier.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit, just for the sake of anyone who has ever been in a really tense, high-pressure environment.
Sure, go for it.
If system 1 is an evolutionary feature, right, and these emotional judgments are fundamentally unconscious and happening at lightning speed, how can we possibly catch ourselves? Like, if the amygdala is hijacking the system before the analytical brain is even fully online, aren't we just essentially doomed to snap at our colleagues or make defensive decisions?
That is the pivotal hurdle Sophia had to overcome in her own research.
Okay.
The biological response is fast, yes, but it is not entirely inescapable if you change your baseline level of awareness.
How so?
Well, Sophia doesn't just read these theories and nod along. She implements an active daily audit of her emotional patterns. Kahneman and Goleman both point to this idea of bringing the unconscious into the conscious through deliberate attention.
Okay, so paying attention to the autopilot.
Exactly. Sophia starts paying hyper-focused attention to her bodily sensations, like her immediate emotional flares throughout the day. When a client pushes back or a deadline suddenly shifts, she practices noticing the physical tightening in her chest, or, that sudden urge to interrupt someone.
Yeah. Oh, that urge is so hard to fight.
It is. But by deliberately labeling those feelings in real time, you essentially recruit the prefrontal cortex to supervise the amygdala.
Oh, I love that. It's kind of like installing a delay pedal on an electric guitar.
Oh, say more about that.
Well, the raw signal is still being generated by the guitar, right? That's your fast emotional system 1, plucking the string.
Right, the initial reaction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But instead of letting that signal travel instantaneously to the amplifier where it just gets blasted out to the whole room for everyone to hear, the delay pedal captures it. It holds the signal in a buffer for just a fraction of a second.
That is a great way to visualize it.
Yeah, that tiny intentional pause gives you the space to decide if you actually want to play that note or if you need to, adjust the volume before anyone else hears it.
Yes. That mechanism, that cognitive buffer, is exactly what transforms a reaction into a response. By practicing that intentional delay, Sophia is actively regulating her internal emotional state. She isn't suppressing the emotion.
She's just managing the output.
Exactly. She is managing the output.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because once you successfully install that internal delay pedal, it fundamentally alters how you project yourself outwardly in a professional setting.
It really does.
You aren't just reacting louder or faster than everyone else anymore. And that leads to a fascinating secondary problem Sophia encounters, which brings her to study Susan Cain's work. specifically her book, Quiet.
Right, because the corporate ecosystem traditionally equates competence and confidence with volume and speed.
Oh, 100%. The loudest person in the room is the boss.
Right, the person who speaks first, the person who dominates the airtime, and the person who makes the fastest decisions is typically perceived as the natural leader. But Susan Cain's research completely dismantles that assumption. She looks at how different nervous systems actually process external stimuli.
Because it's not just a personality quirk. It is a physiological difference in how our brains actually handle information.
Exactly. The science indicates that introverts often route information through longer, more complex neural pathways that are associated with internal processing, memory, and planning.
So they're literally processing more variables before they speak.
Yes. And Cain argues that the corporate obsession with what she calls the extrovert ideal actively marginalizes these incredibly powerful forms of communication. Things like thoughtful listening, deep empathy, and careful observation.
Those are huge skills.
Huge. Confidence does not always roar. Sometimes confidence is just the silent processing of complex group dynamics.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, and I think about this quote all the time, there is this profound reflection from Sophia in the source material after she internalizes Cain's research. She says, "Perhaps the strongest communicator is not always the person who speaks the most, but the one who understands others the best."
Oh, I love that quote. That single sentence redefines the entire concept of workplace value.
It really does.
It shifts the metric of a good communicator from, who is taking up the most acoustic space in the room to who is actually synthesizing the information and building the deepest psychological safety among the team.
Absolutely. And honestly, think about your own workplace right now. Like, picture your next team meeting. Look around that virtual or physical table.
Yeah, who is taking up the airtime?
Right. Who are the loud voices who dominate the agenda just to be heard? And then contrast that. Who are the true communicators? The individuals who might speak the least, but when they finally do unmute or lean in, they completely synthesize the room's chaotic energy into a clear direction.
It is a completely different, highly refined skill set.
It really is a superpower.
But here's the thing. Once Sophia understands this underlying psychology, the internal regulation from Goleman and Kahneman, and the power of quiet observation from Cain, she still faces her original dilemma.
Oh, right. The vocabulary problem.
Exactly. How do you actually articulate this newly discovered self-awareness? You have the upgraded operating system now, going back to your analogy, but how do you program the user interface so others can actually understand it?
This is where we move from behavioral psychology into the actual mechanics of language acquisition, which is so cool.
Yeah, to practice articulating this, Sophia actually joins an international discussion group focused on psychology and human behavior.
And one evening, the moderator poses a question to the group. They ask, "How would you describe your communication style?"
And the contrast between how this group answers and how those executives in the silent room reacted earlier is staggering.
Night and day.
The answers here require immense precision and nuance. Like, one participant shares, "I tend to be analytical and reflective," and another participant says, "I'm collaborative, but I sometimes avoid difficult conversations."
Oh man, the self-awareness in that second answer is just incredible. It acknowledges a strength while simultaneously exposing a vulnerability, just out in the open. Another person replies, "I'm naturally assertive, although I've learned to become more empathetic over time."
Listening to this, Sophia realizes that discussing your inner life requires a highly specialized vocabulary. You cannot just rely on simple, flat adjectives if you want to accurately convey a dynamic, evolving personality.
You can't just say, "I'm nice."
Exactly. So she turns to a text called English Vocabulary in Use, advanced to deliberately construct a toolkit of sophisticated terms.
Let's look at the specific vocabulary she focuses on, because these terms perfectly encapsulate the psychological frameworks we were just discussing. She studies phrases like being emotionally resilient,
Intellectually curious.
psychologically flexible. I think that one is a brilliant term because it implies a sort of structural integrity like a mind that can bend and adapt to new information without just snapping under the pressure of being wrong.
That's a great way to put it. She also integrates terms like introspective, diplomatic, and emotionally regulated.
But the critical insight here isn't the list of words itself, is it?
No, not at all. It is the specific mechanism she uses to learn them. She doesn't just memorize dictionary definitions or use flashcards.
Right, because rote memorization would just be loading data into the short-term memory, which we know just evaporates the moment the amygdala detects the stress of a real-world interview.
Exactly. You'd freeze up all over again. So Sophia utilizes a technique that bridges semantic memory, which is just the dictionary definition of a word, with episodic memory.
And episodic memory is like our autobiographical record of our own lives, right?
Yes. So she writes reflective journal entries where she forces herself to describe her own real lived experiences using these exact advanced terms.
She is essentially writing the code that connects the new vocabulary directly to our personal history.
Yes. Because when you try to memorize the definition of emotionally regulated in a vacuum, it just remains this abstract concept. But if you sit down and journal about the specific incident last Tuesday when a major client threatened to pull their contract, and you felt that familiar tightening in your chest.
Oh, that feeling.
Yeah, but you intentionally engaged your cognitive delay pedal, you took a breath, and you responded calmly. And then you explicitly labeled that specific memory as being emotionally regulated. You have fundamentally changed how your brain stores that word.
It's locked in.
Exactly. The vocabulary is now anchored to an emotion and a lived event. It becomes a permanent part of your identity toolkit.
It is the difference between like reading the instruction manual for a tool and knowing exactly how the weight of that tool feels in your hand because you've actually used it to build something.
That is spot on. And this rigorous process of combining psychological theory with targeted linguistic practice entirely transformed Sophia. It's incredible. It all culminates in this high-level workshop she is invited to deliver for senior managers from across the globe.
Which is aptly titled, Leading Through Emotional Intelligence. And during this workshop, a participant raises their hand and asks a very direct, revealing question. They ask, what personality trait has contributed most to your success?
Her response here really highlights the total paradigm shift she has undergone. She tells the audience, for many years, I believed confidence meant always having the right answers. Now I believe confidence means being comfortable asking thoughtful questions.
Wow.
Yeah. She explains that effective leadership does not begin with external influence. It must always begin with internal comprehension. You cannot manage others if you cannot manage yourself.
And the executives in the room are just deeply impacted by this. In the text notes, they're discussing the concept long after the presentation concludes. It completely shatters the traditional corporate expectation of that loud, infallible leader.
It flips it on its head.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom out and look at the entirety of Sophia's journey, from that silent room to the advanced workshop, what is the ultimate lesson from this source material?
I think the clearest way to see the impact of this journey is to contrast Sophia's former self-perception with her current one.
Okay.
Years ago, if prompted to describe herself, she relied on static, fixed adjectives. She would say things like, I am hardworking, I am friendly, or I am organized.
Which is the verbal equivalent of checking generic boxes on a standardized form. It conveys zero actual depth.
Right. But today, she recognizes that personality is not a fixed label or a permanent state. It is a highly dynamic, constantly shifting combination of your core values, your daily habits, your underlying beliefs, and your emotional regulation patterns.
It's alive.
Exactly. She views identity as something that requires continuous, deliberate cultivation. It is developed through rigorous self-reflection, through the friction of our relationships with others, and through the intentional practice of choosing how we react to the world.
The source material leaves us with this incredibly powerful piece of advice. It says that the most meaningful conversations you will ever engage in, whether that's in a boardroom or in your personal life, are rarely just about the exchange of logistical facts.
Right.
They are about identity. They are about signaling your values, your purpose, and your capacity for growth. Language is so much more than just a utilitarian tool for transferring data. It is the primary mechanism through which we construct and express our evolving selves to the outside world.
And the study of emotional intelligence proves that every interaction is an opportunity to either build or erode trust. And the pursuit of self-awareness proves that any meaningful professional growth must always begin with an unflinching, honest audit of our own internal systems.
So the next time you find yourself in that high-stakes interview or a critical performance review, or frankly, even just sitting across the table on a first date.
Oh, that's a whole other deep dive.
Right. And someone asks you, how would you describe yourself? Resist the urge to just list a series of flat, polished adjectives. Do not just hand them a verbal resume of generic traits. Take a breath, Engage that delay pedal and tell them the story of the person you are actively becoming.
This raises an important question.
Hmm?
A thought I really want you to carry with you as you go about the rest of your day.
Yeah.
We discussed that international group earlier, and that one participant who demonstrated such incredible self-awareness by admitting, "I'm collaborative, but I sometimes avoid difficult conversations."
Such a great quote.
It is. The source material asserts that our personalities do not grow in isolation. They are forged in the fires of our relationships and the challenges we face. If our identity is constantly being shaped by the boundaries we push and the conversations we are willing to have, what part of your personality remains completely undiscovered or entirely undeveloped simply because of the difficult conversations you are currently choosing to avoid?
Wow. If you never stress test the system, you'll never know what the hardware is actually capable of.
A profound realization to end on.
Truly. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope this exploration into the psychology and the language of self-awareness helps you upgrade that internal operating system. Keep analyzing those emotional patterns, keep asking those thoughtful questions, and most importantly, keep growing. We will catch you on the next deep dive.